Hi everyone, welcome back to Voices of Western, the Humans of Western podcast. If you are new, welcome. This is a podcast where we dive deeper into the personal lives of students, staff, and faculty at Western University. Now, before we begin, we wanted to thank you all for taking out some time from your day to listen to our episode. My name is Ria, and today I'm joined by my fellow co-host, Milan.
Thank you, Ria. So today our guest is Danny. Danny is a professor at Western University and teaches Geography 2090 Space Exploration. Danny is passionate about climate change, robotic space exploration, heavy metal, classical music, and hockey, and so much more. Danny has been at Western for over 10 years, and we are beyond excited to have him here join us today. So first of all, how are you doing today, Danny?
I'm doing well, Milan and Ria. Thanks for having me. Always happy to help out around the Western community and introduce myself to more people on campus.
That's amazing. Yeah, and thank you so much again for joining us. So I think let's just dive in. So tell us more about you and the course you teach at Western. Like what motivates you when it comes to teaching it?
Yeah, so I teach a course called Space Exploration out of the Department of Geography and the Environment. I first taught it in 2012, but I've been teaching it more regularly since 2017, but I have taught it 10 times now. The course is kind of an overview of everything you might want to know about space exploration in terms of history and geography. And, what excites me about teaching it, I like to introduce new concepts to students and bring space exploration to them within its context. And that's something that really inspires me to teach about it. I think we all see things once in a while about space exploration online, but as a geographer, I like to bring in space exploration in its context. So meaning that teaching about, the probes we sent to the moon and Mars and the history of human space exploration as well, but in the context of the politics of the time, the economics of the time, social issues, race, class, gender, international relations, all of how these things have affected the history of space exploration. But then the other thing that excites me about the course is it's partly a science kind of course. It's not officially a science course, but we talk about things like the formation of the solar system and why that matters for where we explore and how we explore, the makeup of the planets and their moons and where they are and all that. And I like that. I've always liked to straddle the line between social science and natural science. And this course allows me to do that and allows me to have conversations with students on both sides of that. And it's always interesting to meet a science student who hasn't had to do much in regards to writing about social issues. And it's always fun to meet an arts or a social sciences student who's, learning about some basic science concepts for the first time and they're excited about it. So I like that. I like that it's this kind of huge overview class. I've been fortunate now to teach it, like I said, since 2012 on and off. And it's always full and always very popular, so that's nice. If anyone's interested, I highly suggest signing up for it next year.
That sounds like an amazing course. I think the thing that really stood out to me was how it's kind of interdisciplinary because you're taking a look at science and social science and just different disciplines that merge together, which you don't normally see in a lot of courses around Western. So thank you for actually bringing that up. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, it's super fun to teach about, right? As long as you stay within your lanes in terms of the topics I often just bring in guests and colleagues who know these topics better, whether it's accessibility in space exploration. I just interviewed someone for gender and space exploration, race and class. Like I say, when I bring these things in, I speak to them to the extent that I can, but that's one of the fun parts about the course is bringing in all these other voices that historically haven't really been represented in the space exploration community, and then showing students at Western that this is, the big tent that is space exploration.
No, that's amazing. And as a student, just seeing like a professor passionate about the subject they're teaching, I think just makes the subjects much more fun to learn. And I really like the idea of like you bring guest lectures, and I think it helps us also see if that's a career pathway we want to explore, like get into. So that's an amazing thing you're doing in your classes. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I get that a lot in comments and teaching evaluations, which are very important, and I'm always happy when students take time to provide feedback. But I get passionate a lot, which to me is surprising because I don't think of myself as an overtly passionate person about really anything. Yeah, it's funny people say that. Maybe it's just I don't think I speak overtly passionately, but um, I'm glad that that comes across in a sense. I am, certainly interested and excited to see students take on concepts that I teach them, bring them new places, teach me about stuff through their own writing. So yeah, I mean, if you want to call that passion, that's great. I think that word, obviously, a lot of teachers and instructors use that word, and it's good. But I never really think of myself as passionate. I don't know, it's just me.
Yeah, that's that's actually really interesting. Sometimes you find out things about yourself when somebody else kind of tells you about it. So it really shines through, I guess. And just outside of the classroom as well, I guess your passion kind of shines out in your recent publications. So the rumor is that you've recently published a book called Exploring Mars, the year-by-year narrative of space science from the first Mars landing and beyond. So we kind of wanted to learn more about what really inspired you to write the book and what your overall goal was.
Yeah, so that's the book that's coming out. So it's not technically published yet. We're still working on it, and that's going to be the follow-up to our first book, For All Humankind, which I co-wrote with a colleague of mine who's also a Western alum, and I think now adjunct professor, Dr. Tanya Harrison. And that book, For All Humankind, came about a few years ago. We were driving to Toronto, and she was talking to me about, she had heard someone that she was working with at the time at Arizona State University tell her about his experiences hearing about the first moon landing on the radio while living in Sudan. And she was really inspired by that, and she thought it was a really, really interesting story. And she was talking to me as a geographer, just saying, like, that would be really interesting to hear more about. Like, what did other people, how did they experience the first moon landing, through what media, what were they doing at the time, what was the mood in their corner of the world? Because we've not only, but predominantly heard stories from the United States, to an extent Canada, where we grew up, and maybe the Soviet Union a little bit, about, that time, that day, the space race as a whole. And she was telling me about this idea, and my geographer brain was turning and thinking that would be really, really interesting to hear about, people from around the world on that day, whether they were watching it on TV, or listening to it on the radio, or heard about it afterwards, or read it in the newspaper. So I told her, if you ever write about that, let me know. I can help you out with kind of the geographic components of how people interpret things perhaps differently based on where they come from, or the historical context of the countries they're from, and how to do things like interview people and stuff like that I have a background in as a social scientist, that she doesn't. She's a geologist, so she's never interviewed people or stuff like that. And yeah, about a year later, she emailed me and said, I got a book deal, and the book is due in October, and it was like January. So she said, oh, I pitched you to help me with this. So yeah, the book's due in October. So this was the year I was finishing my PhD at the time, getting ready to move from London to Ottawa. So yeah, we took it on, and we started identifying people from around the world, through our network of people we know in the space community and beyond. We didn't want to just interview people who worked in the space sector. We wanted to go beyond that. And we ended up with 8 people that we talked to. We interviewed them. They told us about their lives in the late 1960s, leading up to the first moon landing in 1969, what they were doing at that time, and then how that affected their life afterwards. And yeah, it's a great little book. We're proud of it. We're happy we were able to get it done, and find 8 unique stories. It's been a while since I looked at it, but the countries, Then we talked to Canada, Chile, Sudan, England, Spain, Mexico, India, and Iran. People from those countries, and what they were doing on July 20th or 21st in some of their cases, 1969. So yeah, we released that the week the pandemic started. So that was maybe, I guess, somewhat of a disappointment in that context. But nonetheless, we're happy to get it done. And yeah, we're working on a follow-up now, which will be a little different, but we're going to look at the history of exploration of Mars since the 1960s to now, on a year-by-year basis, and try to have some fun with it, and hopefully get that out for maybe next spring. But yeah, that's kind of a side hustle, so to speak, of mine in my later years as finishing my PhD and just now moving to Ottawa.
That's actually so interesting. And funny you mentioned about like the different stories. I remember learning about the moon landing through my history class when we were learning about the arms race and in like the Soviet Union and whatever. And I remember hearing this from my teacher's point of view in high school. And I went back home and talked to my grandparents about this, and they had like a whole like the experience from my like a teacher who grew up in Canada from my like my grandparents who grew up in India was totally different. And I found it so interesting, like hearing their different perspectives. And then now, like I can't believe there's actually a book about it, like exploring those different perspectives, because I think that's not much thought about when like you hear about like an event happening in the world, like the different perspectives from like the different regions around the world. So I think that's very, very interesting how there is a book that talks about this. So yeah, no, I'm very intrigued. Like I might read up on it later on today.
Yeah, it's available obviously at bookstores. And that was one of the cool parts of doing this was some of these people we interviewed didn't speak English, so we were working through often their children who were working as translators for us, and their kids were having a lot of fun with it, hearing these stories from their parents or grandparents for the first time, and that was a lot of fun. And then when we were promoting the book here, and just like you mentioned right now, people saying, they read the book or they heard what basic concept of the book, and they went and asked their grandparents or parents about not even just the moon landing, but that was certainly one of them, but just, one thing we wanted to get across in the book was like, what was it like to be a teenager in 1969? And kind of just build that in a little bit. It's not what the book's necessarily about, but we thought, for readers, it'd be a good reminder that it was a completely different world, right? There was no social media, no internet, television coverage was really limited. So this world-changing event, how different was it to experience it back then versus how very different it would be today? So yeah, it's cool to hear that you've had that same experience with your grandparents, and I advocate everyone should talk to their seniors to hear about what was life like before. I think it's just endlessly fascinating to realize how different stuff was.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's really important to spark like those discussions about what things were like in the past and actually like give a voice to our loved ones, or perhaps it's a close friend who kind of grew up in a different generation. I think it's really interesting to make that comparison. Like you just learned so much from one conversation. It can be so powerful.
Yeah, it's mind-blowing sometimes. And I've been very fortunate to have some great mentors who were quite a bit older than me in age, but who I got along with great, but who would tell me about being in academia at a different time, working at a different time, buying a house, all that stuff. And I just think talking, like it can be just, we're on a podcast right now, but it can be just as interesting as any podcast you have in your feed to just ask your grandparent, like, hey, what did you do in the summer in the 50s? Like, what did you actually do? To me, that's such a foreign concept of a completely different world and landscape that it would probably be a fascinating hour-long discussion. And I've had those conversations with my grandma and other older people.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's very, very fascinating. And I mentioned how writing a book is one of your side hustles. Is there anything else that you are currently doing aside from teaching geo and like writing this book?
Yeah, so my main way of paying the bills is working for the Canadian Space Agency. I've been fortunate to work there since 2018. It's a great job. It's a wonderful position. Like I said, it pays the bills. I have a lot of fun at work. I mostly work on the Earth observation side there. And that is to help other government departments in the government of Canada identify applications of satellite data, satellites looking at Earth, not probes looking at other planets, for their applications. So agriculture, fisheries and oceans, climate change, natural resources, stuff like that. So it's a bit of different, than teaching and writing about space exploration. It's still the space sector, but it's focused on the satellites that look at Earth rather than the things we send out to look at the other planets. But yeah, no, it's a great position. I'm very fortunate to have it. It was a dream job kind of to walk out of my PhD into this position. And yeah, I can't say enough good things about it. But I'm also just super thrilled that I still teach and still write, because those are things that I guess I am passionate about.
No, it's really interesting to see how you have like a good mix of everything going. And I think your job itself with the Canadian Space Agency kind of focuses on behind the scenes work that a lot of people don't get to, I guess, talk about, but it really does make like a huge impact, I think. But it's really interesting to see how you get to dive deep into different disciplines in a way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a sore point for geographers that we can sometimes be jacks of all trades, masters of none, potentially. I'm fortunate that I have a good, strong grounding in governance theory and analysis of governance from a geographic perspective. And that allows me to really, jump into different fields. I also have a background in political science and environmental science, so I've used those to my advantage in getting up to pace with space exploration over the last decade plus. But like you say, jumping across disciplines, and I would say I do it less than a lot of people I know. Surprisingly, because when I was in school, I thought, we kind of specialize in something and that's exactly what we do when we finish. But it's really not the case. Certainly not in government and even in academia. Increasingly you're jumping into worlds that you're not necessarily the expert in. You're an expert in something else, but it keeps life fresh, and so many important issues right now are intersectional and cross-cutting, and whether they're policy issues or social issues, you kind of need to have, at least a baseline understanding of a lot of things. So for me, that's, environmental science, space exploration, governance. But, for other people, it's a whole host of other things. And, when you graduate and you finish, you realize you're almost always going to be working on a team with a whole mess of people, backgrounds, and not just 5 experts on the same thing, which was, I don't know, it's fun, but it definitely shatters the illusion that me and maybe some other people have when you're young, that like everyone's an expert at what they're doing, which is not always the case.
No, that's that's actually very helpful too. I think like right now as an undergraduate student, I'm like trying to figure out what I do want to do like after I graduate. Do I want to pursue a master's or PhD, or like what is out there? So I think like hearing our like professors' journey through like whatever they're doing is not just teaching. They have their research aside, and just learning more about that. I think one is very inspiring, and two, also very reassuring, because just like knowing like there are that many possibilities you can do, is like in any in field. And like for example for you, like geography and like tying that into space, that's for me is very very interesting and something that I don't explore myself. So yeah, no, thank you for like showing us that like there is that possibility.
If there's anything I can be honest about to the generation coming up behind me, it's that like adults are not as competent and expert as we all thought when we were kids, which is I think you kind of get a hint of it when you're a kid or you're a university student, but like when you get to your 30s and your 40s, I'm not in my 40s yet, but like you start to realize like, wow, we all kind of don't know what we're doing. And like it's comforting and I say that with this immense privilege of having a PhD and being able to call myself an expert in things. But I still obviously feel like I don't know what I'm doing a lot of the time as well. And that's okay. And that's normal. And I don't know, I try to communicate that to my students. Usually when you're an undergrad or master's, you enter a bit of a perfectionist mode and that's okay too. But, I had good mentors ahead of me who were reminding me, Dr. Phil Stuke, Dr. Jeff Hopkins, both from the Department of Geography, who would tell me like, it's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to not really know what you're doing or to be figuring out on the fly. You need to sometimes kind of let go of that vision you have when you're a kid of like, well, I'm not perfect, but those people ahead of me, they are. It's like, nah, they're not perfect either, and no one is, and we're all just kind of figuring out as we go.
Yeah, I guess just building off of that idea of uncertainty, I think another area where we really see that play out is climate change and sustainability. And I think earlier in this episode, you did touch on it a little bit, but we would love to learn more about how your passion for climate change has kind of paved your academic career.
Yeah, it's I consider myself part of the generation that's born to see, well, depending how you look at it, born to see the end of the world or born to see significant changes in how we do things. And that can be exciting if you look on the bright side of that, which is that we have an opportunity to really reshape things and move forward with a more sustainable pathway. I took an atmospheric science course in my undergraduate, and I was hooked on just the basic concepts of weather and climate. I wasn't so predisposed to a mathematical background that I followed that into climatology or meteorology, but I was really interested in the impacts of weather and climate on society, on people. So I started taking more courses on hazards and natural disasters, natural hazards and disasters. And that led me into kind of doing my PhD on how Canada was preparing for the impacts of climate change. So I saw this as an opportunity to continue studying something I really cared about, which was governance, which is really looking at the way that society organizes itself and who does what in terms of government, academics, industry, and what kind of policy tools we use. But climate change to me there was a pragmatic side to it as well. I knew that if I had a background in specifically climate change adaptation, so an understanding of how will the impacts of climate change, how will climate evolve, how will climate change, how will that impact our societies, what kind of things will we see, intense heat waves, what kinds of duration, what kinds of extreme events, and how do we need to change our built-in social society to prepare for those things. I knew that having a background in that would be really pragmatic. So as much as I found it interesting, it also checked the box of like, would this get me a job afterwards? Which is something I make, a lot of academics throw out things like passion and following your interests, and that is all well and good. But I come from a very low income family and paying the bills is always top of mind. So I knew that I needed to get a background in something that was employable, that I could lean on to work somewhere. And to me, climate change adaptation was something that was only ever going to be increasingly important. So, it shaped my academic career in that I always leaned into that topic as what I would be considered an expert in. That's what I published research papers in. That's what I did my thesis on. All the while, being involved in the space exploration world, going to conferences, writing papers on that as well, teaching the course. But there was a cynical side of me that was like, I might not get a job doing space exploration stuff. So like climate change, if you just look at higher ability, I was like, well, that's what I need to do. So I took a, perhaps overly pragmatic perspective to grad school and school, but like I said, I grew up in a household where paying the bills was the constant concern, and I still have that mentality. So to chase something really, really interesting and fun, but that might not pay off would be great, but I didn't have that privilege essentially. I had other privileges, but not that one. So yeah, it shaped my career in terms of it was something interesting enough that it could hold my attention for 6 years while I did a PhD. But I also was not too worried that I was getting a PhD in something too specific where I might be worried about getting a job afterwards. So maybe that's an overly pragmatic and downer answer, but it's the reality of getting an education. Sometimes is you do want to make sure you're taking care of yourself in the long term, because you will or already do have bills to pay.
No, and it's great to hear how you're so open about that and how like there is this other side to education. And I don't hear most conversations are surrounding that. And I was wondering, like, is your knowledge on climate change and the adaptation, do you try to tie that in into your Geo 2090 course?
Not too much. There's a small component where space exploration and climate change oversect's not the word, I don't think, overlap. And that is in a field called remote sensing. And this is a methodology of using satellites and satellite instruments to collect data about things using satellites. But in my course, we're mostly talking about the history of things that have happened. And we're mostly talking about findings. We're not really going into the methods. So I would say no, not really. However, in my job, climate change adaptation and climate change is always top of mind for using satellites to study Earth and collect data on the Earth. But I haven't delved too much really into the overlap of things happening elsewhere in the solar system and climate change. There's not a huge overlap, in my opinion, but yeah, there's a little bit here and there.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. But yeah, no, it's like again, just like that. It's like interesting how you're kind of able to connect like just like space, like geography, satellites, and then and then like it's like how you did research on that. It's like I find that very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I literally sat down and thought about it quite often about like, what am I doing? And like, what am I studying? And how will this all, and I would get worried sometimes that they were too different, that I was studying climate change and I was studying space exploration, and they're, am I wasting my time on one and not the other? I think at the end of the day, I got really lucky in securing a position with the Canadian Space Agency, in knowing, people like Tanya, my co-author, who was able to kind of drag me into this book deal, and being able to continue teaching. But yeah, I don't know. I think if I wasn't being paid to write and being paid to teach, would I still be really into space exploration? I think so. I've just been really lucky that it's worked out. I get paid to kind of do both climate change stuff at the CSA and space exploration stuff at Western. But yeah, like I said, I often just consider myself lucky in that sense.
Yeah, I guess I just think that it's so important to point out how from my personal perspective, any role that you kind of take in learning about any aspect of climate change and trying to raise awareness about it, I think it is really powerful because the first step to advocacy, I think, is education. So being able to take that step, regardless of whether or not it's like pragmatic or if it's something that's just solely based off of passion and just inspiration, I think whatever work you've been doing, whatever you've been learning is really powerful. So yeah, thank you for talking about that.
Yeah, no, and thank you for pointing out that absolutely. I mean, we should definitely learn about things beyond pragmatism. And you see behind me a bunch of records and books. That's all classical music stuff, which I have absolutely no income related to. That's just a passion of mine, right? I just learn about that stuff for fun. but yeah, whether it's climate change or social issues, even if it's not your job, like you say, it can be really, really important to educate yourself, um, and just become a better person.
Yeah, and for sure. And actually, just to switch gears a bit, so talking about like passions and hobbies, can you what can you say more about mental health in general, and like how has your journey through mental health shaped your teaching and just to your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I made a couple notes here, so I wanted to. So the way it's affected my teaching is that I pretty much always give students the benefit of the doubt in conversations about difficulties with class, difficulties with their well-being in school as a whole. Um, I also teach with a perspective that I should not really be designing my course in any way that would hinder a student's well-being. So what that means to me is that I build a course that tests people's um, challenges people's ability to conduct research, to plan out kind of their semester and know that they need to do this assignment here, this assignment there, but not what I think too many courses did when I was an undergrad, test like essentially your natural resilience, which is what exams and really short-term assignments typically test. Is they don't really test your ability to do research, your ability to put down your thoughts on paper. They really just test how well do you function under pressure, which to me is not what I care about, right? Like, I'm not training fighter pilots. I'm trying to teach the next generation how to take in information, consider it, and put it back down with their own thoughts. That's to me what research is, and that's what education should be all about. Growing as a person, learning more about the world and the universe around us. So I build my course, there's no exam, and I try to build my course more based on assignments. Now, that being said, I guess I have to call myself out. I did have to turn back to online quizzes this year out of a shortage of resources. But the final project is one that is known essentially the entire course. Students have the whole semester to work on it. And like I say, I'm interested in challenging a student's ability to take information in over a long period of time, assess it, and put it back down, whilst learning about academic things like referencing and sources and stuff like that. And yeah, for me, that's a way of education that is better in line with the variety of resiliences that people have or don't have. I was lucky. I actually, despite having a chronic anxiety disorder and depression, I was quite okay with tests, which is weird. I didn't necessarily always sleep well beforehand, but I seemed to somehow still perform. But that's not the case for everyone. And I've been teaching for 10 years, and I've had countless students talk to me about their different resiliences and mental health issues. And I realized, yes, I faced a ton of challenges with depression and anxiety in my life, and especially in undergrad. But in other instances, I was really lucky. So yes, I couldn't really sleep before an exam, but somehow my brain got it done. But that's just a natural resilience. I shouldn't necessarily be rewarded for that or punished, right? So it shapes the way I teach in that I try to build courses and assignments that that again tests to me the ideal scenario for growing as a person, which is taking information, assessing it, interpreting it, engaging others. But things like putting a timestamp on that, or pop quizzes or anything like that, which I think don't really exist anymore. That's not really how I teach. And then the last thing I would say is I try to be the professor instructor I would have wanted when I was 21, 22, 23. And a big part of that is that the first time, when I was an undergrad, first time I started having panic attacks and having, weeks long bouts of severe depression, my initial assumption was, well, I could never be successful, because how could one be successful if every once in a while they just are useless for 2 weeks because they're depressed, or they have panic attacks before events, or just randomly. But as I got older, through treatment and other stuff, you learn that that's okay. But you also, very rarely in my case, but I did hear and see people kind of mention it in passing. Like, oh, they went through something similar, and they're doing okay now. So I took that on to be a far more extreme version of that, where I'm very loud about my past experiences with the intention that people will see that, oh, okay, I can get through it. Like other people struggle extremely hard during undergrad and masters, and they do okay, because there's that really dark side of your brain when you're dealing with mental health issues, where you, at least for me, and I think this is quite common, where you don't think you'll ever be successful, and that's your concern. It's, by successful, I just mean happy. So now, seeing that I'm in a position where others will, whether I want them to or not, call me successful, and where I will call myself happy, I try to tell my students, like, yeah, you can, like, I have a full-time job at a space agency. I'm a published author and I'm an instructor, but I have panic attacks and depression. So like, you can, and there's probably CEOs of companies and politicians and all sorts of stuff. I just didn't hear that when I was young, and maybe it was my own little bubble that I didn't know about. But I just try to be, really loud and tell them. And if they don't struggle with those challenges, they probably have other challenges in their lives, right? I'm a straight white guy, so I've got some privileges on my side too, and I'm loud about that as well. Those probably helped me get through. So I try to let that influence the way I talk to my students, kind of open the door to them, remove the mystique of the super successful professor man who's just up there and is perfect. I don't know if that's what students think when they look at a professor. I think I kind of did when I was young, or at least at some of my professors. And I remember hearing when I first started teaching certain things from students where I felt like, oh, like they think I'm like, I drive in an Audi and like live in a giant mansion. Like these kids think I'm like super well off and super successful, but like I'm just a PhD student teaching. But you never know how people perceive you. So I just try to be honest and open about where I have been, where I am. And that's how I kind of remove the stigma of mental health in my teaching.
First of all, I think I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story, because I think honestly it takes a lot of courage to just share your perspectives, and especially on like a larger platform where you're sharing this with your students as well. I think that it just opens up the floor to conversations that we just don't really get to have otherwise, and just like breaking down the assumptions that we tend to make about professors or influential figures in our life, just assuming that, oh, they don't really deal with anything related to their mental health. But I think it's so important to have that conversation. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah.
And I need to catch myself sometimes. Like, I have bosses at work, or I have people I know, friends even, who I just think are put together and have everything perfect in your life. And we all have our struggles and whatnot. And if you're close enough with someone that you can be honest with them, or if you just want to be a better person, just always not assume, but you never know what people are dealing with, right? Whether they're successful or not, and or happy or not. So it's good to kind of remove the mystique sometimes.
And I like how you mentioned how not everyone is perfect. I think, for example, once you get a test back and it didn't go as well as you expected, I feel like you have that tendency to compare yourself to others who do amazing, and you think like, oh, everyone's just doing so much more better, and you sometimes you're in that little bubble, and you talked about like the dark side of your brain. You're in that bubble, it's like, oh, there's like, well, how am I supposed to get up from this? So just knowing that like professors who have like PhD masters also do go through the same struggles, like, or like same similar thought processes as like students may do is one, like again, like reassuring, and also lets us know that it's not like the end of the world as we may sometimes assume that it is, when like we first do get like that first mark back first, or like that first course grade back. So I think yeah, like again, like on Ria's side, like thank you for like letting us know that it is not that perfect image that we sometimes like create in our head. Like there is that other side that sometimes it's not, and actually most of the time not talked about.
Mhm. Yeah, well, you're welcome, and I can only thank the people who did that a little bit before me as well. And there's a lot more talk about it now. If you're on Twitter at all, before whatever's happening to it now, but uh, you'll see academics tweeting in so-called academic Twitter about the importance of talking about failure, telling your students about failure. Failure resumes was a big thing for a bit. I don't know if it still is, but essentially professors would put on their websites like all the applications that didn't get accepted, right? Because CVs and resumes are a falsehood, right? Like, well, they're not a falsehood, they're true, but they're very selective. And it's just like our Instagram post, right? It's all the pics of you where you look the best. But like, that's what your resume is too. It's all your best things. But like most everyone in life, and definitely a lot of academics, have a much longer resume of all the things that didn't get accepted, or all the bad grades they got in undergrad or masters or whatever. So it is cool that people talk about it a lot more. Um, yeah, and in practice, like now that I'm in the professional world, things are definitely, I think, better for people who struggle with mental illness. But you know the, just like I need to learn about other things in life, race, class, gender, there are others who need to learn about my experiences, and I need to learn about theirs. And it's a process. And but I'm happy. I not to diminish what anyone might be going through today, but I'm happy things are way better for undergrads today than they were when I was going through it. And certainly, I'm sure in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, God, who knows how mental health was talked about back then. I'm sure not good. So I'm glad it's better, but it's still not perfect, and we still need to support students.
Yeah, I think you just brought up so many amazing examples, and I think it just opened up a whole discussion that definitely needs to be carried forward on like at another time as well. But yeah, thank you for that. But we're going to be switching things up a little bit, and we're going to be diving into our segment. So this segment is called Western Bites. So we'll be taking you down on a walk down memory lane by exploring Western eateries, and we kind of hope to hand down the years of knowledge and experience about the best spots to grab a bite around Western to our listeners. So we're going to be talking about places like Einsteins, the UCC Center Spot, the Spoke, the Wave, the Ivy Eateries, things like that. So just to start off, okay, are you
Yeah,
ready?
I am ready, and I'm not gonna lie, I did a little bit of research ahead of time. So
It's okay. It's always better to be over prepared than under.
yeah.
So for the first one, where is your go-to place to grab a quick bite around campus?
So my office was in the social science building. So my go-to was the Spoke, because whether it was winter or summer, well, in the summer I'd go outside. In the winter, it's connected by a tunnel. So I didn't have to put any jacket on or anything.
Oh.
So yeah, the Spoke, uh, either cafe or kitchen, both very good. But that was my go-to. And I'll leave it there because I know some of the follow-ups will dig a bit more into these places.
Yeah, no, I definitely recommend the Spoke. The Spoke is amazing. And yeah, follow up. Like, what do you miss most about these Western eateries?
Okay, so here's where I might get controversial. Okay, so I miss the most something, and I don't know. Sorry, you guys are Milan, you're second year?
I'm in second year.
Yeah, and Ria.
I'm in my fourth year.
Okay, so you might know. I don't know how long this has been the case. The CLT does not appear to be on the Spoke menu right now. Do you know what a CLT is?
No.
No, I
Okay, so
don't.
it's been okay. It's been okay. So So it was a chicken, lettuce, tomato wrap. It was in a weird kind of pita wrap, not a conventional, or it was more like a souvlaki wrap. Like it was a thick bread, not like your typical wrap. And it was delicious. And it was a go-to, it was a standard, which is why I assumed it was still there. So I don't know what happened between 2019 when I left and now, but there's no CLT on the spoke menu. And it was a standard, like it was a regular. So I don't either, I'm having some sort of massive Mandela effect moment, or it's been taken off the menu. And I'm not okay with that. And I would advocate a campaign be started to get the CLT back at the spoke, or just like I would like to speak to the manager and find out what happened. But yes, I miss the most the CLT and the spoke fries. But yes, that's my answer, the CLT, and it's not there anymore.
We got to bring it back. Petition to bring this CLT back. We're going to get this started.
I mean, other people must remember it. So it was a thing, like even if you Google CLT Western, you'll see like articles here and there about like things you should do on Western campus. And one of them is get a CLT. So it was a thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Whoever's listening to this episode right now, let us know if you know the CLT wrap. Like, I'm very curious. This is my first time hearing about it.
Yeah, I want to know more too. Just building off of that.
Yep.
Is there something from Western eateries, like the menu in general, that you think you can't find anywhere else?
Yeah, it was a CLT. It was that was the only thing, because everything else I can find it elsewhere. But the CLT was this weird concoction. Like I said, it was using like the thick, almost like a shawarma wrap or like souvlaki wrap, like the thicker bread, not what you would get a sandwich wrap in. And that changed everything. And then there was mayo, lettuce, tomato, chicken. And I'm vegetarian now, so I would only eat it as a either severe treat, or here's my other suggestion to the spoke people. You could do, there are veggie chicken strips now that are very similar to the strips that were in the CLT. And that was the other thing. The CLT, it was like chicken strips, like a chicken breast diced or sliced into strips, stuffed in. It was amazing. And yeah, so that's what I miss that I can't get.
All right. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. No, I will go to the spoke tomorrow and ask what happened to the CLT wrap.
I mean, so I was thinking about that, because if I haven't been back to Western largely because of the pandemic, but had I gone back for a conference or anything, I definitely would have gone to get a CLT, and I would have ordered it, and it would have been, you know, some poor 20, 21-year-old who's probably only been there for a year or two, never heard of this thing either. And I would have looked like a crazy old man saying, like, back in my day, we had a CLT. What, give me a CLT? So I suspect anyone that you go speak to also won't know about this unless it's the same manager. I remember there was a manager there. It was an old, not an older guy. He was in his 30s or 40s. He was the manager of the kitchen part. So if he's there, he knows. So that's who I would talk to.
Okay, noted. That is who I will talk to. But yeah, also, switching gears from the spoke, is there an underrated drink from Einsteins that you think that students should really try, or like you really like?
So as a social science person, I didn't really know about Einstein's for a while, which I know might be strange because it's like natural sciences is kind of a central hub, I think, for a lot of students, and because of the bus stops as well. So Einstein's was kind of like a newish surprise to me in my last few years. I would say everything. I don't know the drinks per se. We're getting into festive coffee season, which I am a huge fan of. Today was the first snow, and I audibly gasped when I opened the window. My girlfriend laughed at me. She's like, "I heard you gasp," and I was like, "Yeah, it's snowed. I'm a regular Lorelai Gilmore. When it snows, I get excited." And so Einstein's, any festive drink, I recommend. So like hazelnut praline. I don't know what praline is, but it's in festive drinks, and I like it. But yeah, I don't know much about Einstein's. I really liked also kind of the ambiance that was next to a library and it was cool. But I wasn't in natural science too often.
It's actually kind of funny because Milan was also talking to me about like the festive drink menu, and she was like, "I went by today. They haven't brought it out yet." So I
Oh,
think,
okay.
yeah. So they
Yeah.
really got to bring that back.
I think I only found the hazelnut. I remember last year because I was usually at my classes were usually on that side. I would always go to the Einsteins, and they had this cinnamon one. They had this raspberry hot chocolate, and they were really really good. So I would also recommend the festive menu part for Einsteins. But yeah, no, I went today to see if they still had it, and I only saw the hazelnut. So I was like, is this a
Okay.
part of the festive menu, or is it has not been brought out yet? So I'm very curious about that as well.
Okay, I'll give him a. Has it snowed in London yet?
It has, yeah.
Okay, so it should. I mean, to me, that's when someone should bring out the festive drinks. But okay, well, you can go to the Spoke and get mad about the CLT, and then you can go to Einstein's and
Yeah.
demand festive menu.
We've got a whole journey laid out for us. But speaking of libraries, because Einstein is by Taylor, exam season's coming up. So, do you have any recommendations for comfort food around campus?
Yeah, so Spoke Bagel would be the go-to. I used to get Spoke Bagel and a chocolate milk. Very carb heavy meal. Carbs are your friend. Well, sorry, carbs are my friend when I'm stressed out or anxious or depressed. Um, I don't know. They make me feel better. I don't want to point to any evidence because I don't know that there is. I know that I get angry if I don't eat enough carbs, but I know that if I'm really down, both seriously down with like anxiety, depression, or just need a pick me up, carbs make me feel good. Um, so that would be my main go-to comfort food. The extremely greasy bagels at the Spoke. I don't know what they do if they like dip them in grease. I'm not complaining, but like you get a toasted bagel from the Spoke, or at least it used to be like this. Maybe they've switched it, and it was the grease would like cut through the bag. I'm not complaining, but I just remember that about them. There was a pizza place in Center Spot for a while, and now there's one, or there was one also in the basement of Natural Science. There's like a little food court down there with like a burrito place and a pizza place and a Tim's. Tim's is comfort food as well in general. Um, yeah, but pizza or bagel would be go to. Bagel's easier to transport, so that would probably be the best.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I also agree with the pizza place, and yeah, it's like in that hidden spot in Tim Hortons, like right beside like that door, like like many people pass by. I remember my first year, I see the sign for the pizza place, but I went in and I'm like, where is this? And then I realized it's like that door that's like in between, like in a very odd spot. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and especially sometimes that door's closed because Tim's is open later, and it like you wouldn't even know something's back there. But then you walk in and there's when I was there a burrito place and a pizza place. Um, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And then finally, I think this is the most cliche question, but I think it is answered. What is your go-to Spoke order? Like, what would you ask for on your bagel?
It was the jalapeno cheddar bagel toasted with garlic cream cheese, and then a chocolate milk. And then at the kitchen, so that was the cafe order. At the kitchen, it was either a CLT with fries and a Dr. Pepper, because they have, at least they did have the fountain drinks outside, so you get your own, or a buffalo wrap, fries and Dr. Pepper. I know the buffalo wrap is still on the menu. I had someone who was a Western like lifer. They did their undergrad, master's, PhD there. Tell me that it was called a buff wrap. I don't know if that's still a thing, but I was told that was the proper way to refer to a buffalo wrap from the Spoke. Again, this could have all changed since I was gone, but those were my go-tos. Yeah.
Yeah, for our listeners, the next time that you're walking by the Spoke, you'll now be well prepared. You'll know what your orders are, And we now know what we need to petition to bring back. So we'll get on that.
Yeah,
ASAP.
yeah. Or at least find out what happened. Like, because they still have chicken on the menu. So it's not like they went vegan or anything like that. So I don't know. Maybe they couldn't get those wraps anymore. I don't know.
I'm actually interested to find out, but we'll definitely follow up and let you know. But yeah, I guess that's it for our segment. So thank you for sharing all of your answers. I'm sure that our listeners enjoyed that as well. All right, so that wraps up today's episode. Be sure to follow us on our socials. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and you can find this episode on any podcast platform you use, including Apple Podcast, Spotify, and more. We hope you all enjoyed it, and make sure to look out for our next episode.
And thank you so much, Danny, for joining us today. I have lots of fun recording this episode.
Yeah, thanks to both of you for inviting me and chatting with me. Appreciate it a lot.